They say every hero is bound by fate. Some rise to greatness only to burn too brightly, consumed by the very fire that made them immortal. Among the warriors of myth, none burned more fiercely, or fell more tragically, than Cú Chulainn, the Hound of Ulster. His name was etched into legend with blood, glory, and a curse so cruel that even the gods trembled to watch it unfold. Welcome, wanderer, to Night's Story. Tonight, we walk the shadowed path of Ireland's most haunting hero. This is not just the tale of battles and victories, but of a man marked by destiny, shaped by rage, and undone by the very gifts that made him divine. Let us journey deep into the mist of myth, where swords gleam under storm-lit skies and a curse whispers across the centuries. Act 1: The Boy Who Bore a God's Shadow. In the green mists of ancient Ireland, when kings rose and fell like shifting tides, a child was born in the shadow of gods. His name was Setanta, though the world would one day call him Cú Chulainn. He was no ordinary child, for his blood carried threads of divinity, whispered to be sired by Lugh, the shining god of light and war. His mother, Diachtain, bore him with trembling hands, as if she knew this boy's life would never belong fully to her or to the mortal world at all. From the first breath, Setanta was restless, fierce, as if something wild had awakened inside him. Other children laughed, played, and stumbled. He, however, ran with the strength of grown men, his small fists striking harder than they should, his eyes burning with a strange fire that unsettled even his elders. He was loved, yes, but feared as well. For in him lay the seed of something both wondrous and terrible. The day came when his foster father, Cullen the smith, invited nobles to a feast. Setanta, delayed by games with other boys, arrived late. Cullen had loosed his great hound, a beast said to be large as a horse, with fangs like knives. The hound saw the boy as an intruder and charged, its growl shaking the night. But Setanta did not flee. He stood, barehanded, and when the hound leapt, he caught it by the throat. With a strength no child should possess, he slammed it against the earth and broke its neck. The feast fell silent as nobles rushed out to find a boy standing over the corpse of a beast that had guarded a king's hall for years. Cullen mourned his hound, his protector and companion. Setanta's heart twisted with guilt, for though he had acted in defense, he knew he had taken something irreplaceable. "I will make it right," he declared. "I will guard your home in place of the hound. From this night forth, I will be your watchdog." And so, the boy took the name Cú Chulainn, the Hound of Cullen. It was the first sign of his fate, that he would forever be bound to blood and to vows, chained to roles others expected of him. Though his name carried honor, it also marked him as one who lived in service of duty, not of choice. Already, the curse of destiny began to whisper its hold. As the boy grew, so too did his strength. He trained with the warriors of Ulster, and none could match his hunger for battle. Yet with his gift came a shadow, a strange madness, known as the Riostrad, the warp spasm. When rage took him, his body twisted into something monstrous. His muscles bulged, his face contorted, his eye sank deep into his skull while the other bulged out grotesquely. His hair stood on end, and a fiery aura blazed from his skin. He became a storm of destruction, tearing through men as if they were reeds in the river. Those who saw it recoiled in fear. Was this a hero, or a monster in a man's skin? The people whispered both, for they could not deny his victories, nor could they deny the horror of his transformation. Still, Cú Chulainn's name grew. Songs were sung of his bravery. He won battles none thought possible. But fate, ever cruel, had marked him from the start. Heroes burn brightly, yes, but the brighter the flame, the sooner the darkness claims them. And in the quiet of the night, when no battle raged and no songs were sung, Cú Chulainn felt it too. A loneliness, a heaviness in his chest. For though he was revered, he was also feared. Though he was surrounded by warriors, none truly stood beside him. He was a hero, yes, but already, he was cursed to stand apart. Act 2: The Rise of the Hound. The boy who had slain a hound was now a youth whose name carried across the hills of Ulster. But strength alone was not enough to shape a man's destiny. For all his power, Cú Chulainn's heart longed for more than battles and glory. He wanted love. He wanted something that could tether his restless soul to the world of men, to remind him he was not only a weapon, not only a storm called forth to protect a kingdom. It was then he saw her, Emer, daughter of Fergal Monarch. She was no meek maiden, no fragile beauty meant to be bartered between kings. Her eyes burned with wit, her voice carried the sharpness of steel, and her words danced with riddles that tested even the keenest mind. When Cú Chulainn first looked upon her, it was not her face alone that captured him, but the challenge she set before him. Others had sought her hand, warriors proud and kings wealthy, but Emer scorned them all. She demanded of her suitors 6 gifts: a flawless reputation, wisdom beyond youth, beauty unmatched, lineage noble, the strength to protect her, and a love that would not falter even in the face of death. Men faltered before such demands. But Cú Chulainn smiled, for he knew the path of his life had already been set in that direction. Yet Emer's father, Fergal, despised him. He saw in Cú Chulainn not a suitor, but a danger. A boy cursed with the Ryostrad, a wildness no family would dare to bind itself to. To rid himself of this threat, Fergal plotted. He told the young warrior, "If you truly wish to wed my daughter, you must first train with the greatest warrior women of the world. Only then shall you be worthy of her hand." It was a task meant to destroy him. For the path led across seas, into the lands of shadows and deadly masters. But Cú Chulainn did not hesitate. With the fire of youth and love burning in his chest, he set forth. His journey brought him to Scathach, the warrior woman whose name was spoken in whispers. Her fortress stood upon the Isle of Skye, a place where the sea screamed against jagged cliffs and the wind howled with the voices of the dead. Scathach was no gentle teacher. She wielded blades that gleamed like starlight and struck harder than storms. To her students, she gave not instruction, but trial by pain. Cú Chulainn trained under her until his body bore scars that never healed. He fought by day until his muscles trembled, then fought by night until his breath came ragged and sharp. Yet he endured, and more than endure, he excelled. His skill grew sharper than the blade, his speed faster than the hawk. Even Scathach, who had shaped countless warriors, looked upon him with awe. But training alone was not enough. Fate placed before him another test, darker still. For Scathach had a rival, Ife, a warrior queen who commanded armies. She came to challenge Scathach, and with her, she brought war. Cú Chulainn, though still young, took up arms. In the heat of battle, when warriors clashed like waves upon rock, he faced Ife herself. She was fierce, her strikes raining down like iron hail. But Cú Chulainn was swifter. He seized upon a distraction, cried out that her most prized chariot and horses had been lost, and in the moment her eyes flickered aside, he struck her down. Yet even then, he spared her life. Perhaps it was mercy, or perhaps it was something else, a recognition of her strength. In time, their paths entwined, and she bore him a son, though fate would see that son return to his father's life not as a blessing, but as another cruel twist of destiny. From Scathach, he received the greatest weapon of his life, the Gaebalg, a spear unlike any other, forged with secrets only gods might know. It was said to pierce the body with 100 barbs, each tearing through flesh and bone until no enemy could survive. But such a gift came not as a blessing alone. To wield it was to carry a weapon cursed to bring only sorrow, for every time it was cast, it meant the end of something precious. Armed now with strength, skill, and a weapon worthy of legends, Cú Chulainn returned to Ulster. He had faced death and risen beyond it. He had trained with the greatest, and he had emerged victorious. With such deeds behind him, even Fergal could not deny him Emer. The two were wed, their love burning fiercely, though beneath it lay the shadow of prophecy. For happiness was never meant to last for one such as Cú Chulainn. The warriors of Ulster welcomed him as their champion, and his feats became the songs of bards. He stood alone against armies, defended borders no other dared to guard, and time and again, his warped spasm turned the tide of battles. His enemies feared his name, his allies clung to it as their last hope. Yet even as his fame grew, so too did the curse that clung to him. He could not escape the loneliness of his path. To be the Hound of Ulster was to be set apart, to bear the weight of kingdoms while others slept in peace. His love for Emer gave him moments of light, but even she knew she had married not only a man, but a legend already bound to tragedy. On the battlefield, he was unstoppable. But in the quiet of night, he would stare into the darkness, hearing the whisper of fate's cruel promise. Every hero must fall. Every flame must burn out. And his would be a firestorm. Act 3, The War of the Bull. The years turned, and the songs of Ulster grew louder, each verse carrying the name of Cú Chulainn. Yet songs have a way of drawing envy, and glory, in the old world, was never left uncontested. Across the borders of Ulster, in the kingdom of Connaught, Queen Medb and her consort Allo listened to these tales of Ulster's hound with eyes that narrowed in envy. For if Ulster had its champion, then Connaught would find a way to break him. But pride alone was not enough to stir a war. It began, as so many tragedies do, with something deceptively simple, a quarrel between lovers. One night, Queen Medb and King Alla lay in bed, speaking of wealth and power. Their words twisted into comparison, each boasting of what they had brought into the marriage. Alla, smirking, claimed he had brought more riches. Medb, stung by pride, refused to be outdone. They tallied their treasures, jewels, horses, gold, lands, silks. In all things, they were matched. But when it came to cattle, Alla held a beast that tipped the balance, Finnbench, a great white-horned bull whose strength and size eclipsed all others. Medb, refusing defeat, declared she would find his equal, or better. Her gaze turned to Ulster, where the brown bull of Cooley roamed, a beast as mighty as Finnbench. And thus, a queen's wounded pride lit the spark of war. Medb raised an army vast and terrible, a tide of warriors that darkened the land as it marched toward Ulster to seize the bull. But fate conspired strangely. At the moment when Ulster most needed its warriors, a curse fell upon them. Long ago, the goddess Macha had been wronged by Ulster's king, forced to run a race while pregnant. Her vengeance was cruel and enduring. When Ulster faced its darkest hour, its men would be struck down with pains like childbirth, their strength stolen, their bodies writhing in weakness. And so it came to pass. As Medb's army swept in, the warriors of Ulster lay broken, groaning like women in labor, unable to lift their swords. Only one stood unbroken, Cú Chulainn. The young champion, still scarcely more than a boy, bore the weight of an entire kingdom. Alone, he strode forth to meet the army of Connaught, his eyes burning, his spear gleaming, his heart heavy with the knowledge that fate had chosen him once again to stand apart. He did not falter. He could not. For if he stepped aside, Ulster would fall. But Cú Chulainn did not rush into slaughter. He was no mindless beast, not then. Instead, he invoked the ancient right of single combat. One warrior at a time would face him, sparing the land from endless carnage. Medb, though furious, agreed, for her pride would not let her army be seen as cowards refusing the challenge of one man. And so the duels began. Day after day, a warrior of Connaught stepped forth, and day after day, Cú Chulainn cut them down. His gate-ball pierced through armor, his blade sang through flesh, his warped spasm left the earth soaked in crimson. Yet he fought not only with brutality, but with honor. Each foe was given their chance, each duel fought fairly. And still, none could match him. The songs say he stood at the fords, rivers running red with blood, his body broken by wounds, yet his spirit unbent. He fought until his hands trembled, until sleep dragged at his eyes. Even then, he found no rest. For at night, Medb sent warriors to ambush him in his sleep, and even in dreams, he fought. But war is not only fought with steel, it is fought with cunning. Medb, seeking to break him, sent not just warriors, but temptation. She sent the Morrigan, the phantom queen of battle, who came to him first as a maiden offering love, then as an eel, a wolf, a heifer, each form striking at him, seeking to wound his body and soul. But Cú Chulainn, though battered, defied her. He struck her down again and again, until at last she cursed him, promising that when his final battle came, she would not forget. And so the curse grew heavier. The war dragged on, and Ulster's hound grew wearier, his wounds deepening, his spirit fraying. Yet still he stood. The land itself seemed to bleed with him, the sky dark with crows circling above. But fate is cruelest when it turns friends into foes. For among those Medb called to battle was Ferdiad, Cú Chulainn's foster brother, the one who had trained with him under Scathach. They had shared bread, shared laughter, shared secrets. They had fought side by side, their blades ringing in practice, their bond closer than blood. When Ferdiad was summoned to fight him, he refused at first. "I will not raise my hand against the one who is as a brother to me." But Medb's words twisted around him like chains. She mocked him, called him a coward, promised him riches, honor, and shame if he did not stand. In the end, pride and pressure forced his hand. The duel of Cú Chulainn and Ferdiad was unlike any other. For 3 days they fought, neither yielding, neither willing to strike the final blow. Their friendship clung to them, even as their weapons clashed. At night, they sent each other gifts, food, bandages, words of care. And in the morning, they returned to slaughter. It was a battle of love and hate, of loyalty and betrayal, of two hearts bound by fate yet torn apart by war. On the final day, the river ran red as they met again. Ferdiad, desperate, forced Cú Chulainn to draw the Gaebalg, the spear of sorrow. And when it struck, it tore through Ferdiad's body, barbs ripping him apart from within. Ferdiad fell, his blood staining Cú Chulainn's hands, his eyes dimming with the weight of betrayal and loss. And Cú Chulainn, the mighty hound, knelt over his foster brother's body and wept. The cries shook the land, louder than any victory song, more terrible than any war cry. For in that moment, the hero felt the deepest cut of all, not the wounds of battle, but the curse of fate, which demanded that everything he loved would one day be taken from him. Still, even broken, he stood again. For Ulster needed him, and though his soul bled, his duty bound him tighter than any chain. Alone, he drove back the armies of Connaught, until at last the men of Ulster rose from their curse and joined him. Together, they turned the tide. The brown bull of Cooley was taken, yes, but at terrible cost. Blood soaked the fields, friendships were lost, and Cú Chulainn, though still alive, carried another weight upon his heart. The songs call it a victory. But for the Hound of Ulster, it was another wound carved deep by destiny. Act 4, The Threads of Betrayal. The land was quieter after the Great Raid, but peace, for Cú Chulainn, was always a shadow too brief to hold. The years after the war left him scarred, both in body and in soul. His victories had been carved into song, but so too had his sorrows. He had stood against armies, he had faced gods in disguise, he had killed his foster brother with his own hand. No warrior alive could match his glory, and yet no man alive carried so much weight upon his shoulders. For a time, he tried to return to life as it once had been. He returned to Emer, his wife, whose love never faltered, though she knew her place was to watch him drift further from her with every battle fought. Their moments of peace were fragile, fleeting as mist in the morning sun. He would sit with her, laugh with her, feel warmth for a time, and then duty would call, and once again he was the hound, no longer her husband, but Ulster's weapon. In those years, whispers grew. The Morrigan, the Phantom Queen, had not forgotten him. From the shadows, she stirred, weaving fate's net tighter. Where once she had come to him as maiden, eel, wolf, and cow, now she came as crow, perching on the branches above his battles, watching with eyes as black as night. Each time he saw her, he knew the end was drawing nearer. But it was not only gods who wove betrayal around him. Men too carried envy in their hearts, and enemies never sleep when a hero stands so tall. His enemies began to seek his weakness, for surely no man could be invincible. And weakness, when it appeared, came from within his own blood. Years before, when he had trained under Skahek, he had lain with Ife, the rival warrior queen. From that union, a child had been born, a son named Connla. Cú Chulainn did not know of him, but the boy grew strong, inheriting the same fire that burned in his father. Ife, proud and bitter, sent Connla to Ireland when he was of age, warning him never to reveal his name, never to turn aside from combat, and never to retreat before any challenge. When Connla came to Ulster, he stood tall and fearless, his skill unmatched by any warrior save one. Word of his prowess reached Cú Chulainn, who was sent to confront the stranger threatening the borders of his land. Neither father nor son knew the truth as they faced each other on the shore, waves crashing against rocks like the heartbeat of fate. Cú Chulainn warned the youth to turn back, but Connla refused, bound by his mother's commands. The two fought fiercely, their strikes ringing like thunder, each blow testing, each movement familiar in ways they could not name. But the fight was not destined for peace. At last, forced to draw the Gaebalg, Cú Chulainn struck his son down. It was only as the boy lay dying that the truth was revealed. Connla spoke his mother's name, spoke of the bond that tied them, and Cú Chulainn's heart shattered. He had slain his own flesh and blood, another victim to the curse that hounded his every step. His cries of grief carried across the sea, heavy enough to silence even the gulls. From that day, sorrow carved deeper lines into his face. He was a man still young, yet he carried the eyes of one who had lived 100 lifetimes of loss. And fate, merciless as ever, was not done with him. Ulster still needed him, for enemies circled like wolves around a wounded deer. Again and again, he was called to battle. Again and again, he fought until the earth itself seemed to groan beneath his fury. But though his strength never failed, his heart grew weary. Each fight was another reminder that he could not escape his role, could not choose peace, could not walk the path of an ordinary man. And so came the betrayals. In Connaught, Queen Medb still schemed. Her hatred of Ulster's champion never cooled, her envy of his fame never ceased. Again and again, she sought ways to undo him, weaving alliances, sending spies, planting seeds of treachery. And closer to home, not all in Ulster loved him. Some resented the fear he inspired, the glory he commanded. A hero too great casts long shadows, and men began to wonder if perhaps their hound was also their cage. The gods too watched with unease. Cú Chulainn's blood was part divine, but his fury was too wild, his strength too great. What place was there in the world for a man who could not be stopped? Even gods fear what they cannot control. And so the net closed. The Morrigan's crow circled lower. Medb's plots grew sharper. His friends grew fewer. His enemies grew bolder. And in the silence of his heart, Cú Chulainn knew. He had always known. From the moment he had slain Cullen's hound and taken its name, from the first time the Ryostrad twisted his body into a monster, from the day he held Ferdiad dying in his arms. Heroes do not grow old. Heroes do not fade gently into the night. Heroes fall, and their fall becomes their legend. Still, he did not turn away. The path was set, and Cú Chulainn, though burdened by grief, walked it without hesitation. He had loved and lost. He had triumphed and suffered. And soon, he would face the greatest battle of all. The signs were already there. Dark omens crept across the land. The Morrigan's crows gathered in numbers too great to count, blackening the sky. Dreams plagued him, visions of blood, of chains, of himself bound to the earth as enemies circled. And when he woke, Emer's eyes searched his face, seeing in his silence what his words could not speak. She knew, though he never said it aloud, his time was nearing its end. The greatest curse of the hero is not death itself, but the knowledge of it. To live with the certainty that one's fate is sealed, that no victory can alter the ending written before birth. And so Cú Chulainn waited, each dawn bringing him closer to the day when fate would call him to his final stand. Act 5, The Last March of the Hound. The omens had been building for months. The Morrigan's crows filled the skies of Ulster, blotting out the sun with their black wings. The rivers turned red with strange blooms, and dogs howled at night as if morning of death not yet come. Cú Chulainn, though still in his prime, felt the weight of it pressing against his bones. He had carried wounds before, spears through flesh, blades across sinew, fire against skin, but this heaviness was different. It was not the wound of the body, but of the soul. He knew his end was coming. Emer knew it too. One evening, as twilight bled across the horizon, she watched him sharpening his spear by the fire. His movements were steady, but there was a stillness in his eyes, like a man listening to a sound only he could hear. She reached for him, her fingers brushing his hand. "Don't go," she whispered. His lips curved in a sad smile. The hound does not choose when he hunts. He goes when he is called. Her tears glistened in the firelight, but she said no more. For she understood the cruel truth: Cú Chulainn was not only her husband, nor even Ulster's champion. He belonged to fate itself, and fate would not be denied. The summons came soon after. The armies of Connaught had risen again, stirred once more by Queen Medb's wrath. But this time, the scheme was more vicious, more carefully laid. Medb and her allies knew the strength of the hound. They had seen him stand against armies, had seen him kill kings, champions, and his own brother in arms. They knew no single warrior could face him and live. So they sought to ensnare him with weakness, not with swords. On the morning of his march, 3 hags awaited him at a crossroads. They were bent and broken, their hands gnarled like roots, their eyes clouded with age. Before them, on a spit, roasted the flesh of a hound. They beckoned him to join them, their voices raspy, their smiles toothless. Cú Chulainn paused, his chest tightening. He remembered the Giza, the taboos laid upon him since youth. One was never to eat the flesh of a dog, for he had taken the name of hound, and to eat of its flesh would be to betray himself. But another gesh bound him as well, never to refuse hospitality, never to turn away food when offered. The hags watched him, knowing. To break one vow was to dishonor his name. To break the other was to court divine punishment. There was no path untainted. With a heavy heart, he reached for the meat, chewing slowly, his throat tightening as though each bite were poison. And in that moment, he felt it, the curse settling deeper into his bones. His strength faltered, a sickness spread through him. The Giza had done their work. He was no longer invincible. Still, he marched on. When he reached the battlefield, the air itself seemed to recoil. The Connaught armies stood in vast ranks, spears gleaming, shields raised. Yet there was no cheer, no battle cry. They had seen the hound fight before. They had seen rivers choke with the blood of those who thought to match him. But today was different. Today, fate whispered that he was theirs to take. Cú Chulainn raised his spear, his voice carrying across the field. Who among you dares step forth first? And so they came, one after another. Champions, mercenaries, kings for hire. Each fell beneath his fury, but not without cost. His body grew heavier with wounds, his arms slower with each strike. Where once his warp spasm transformed him into a storm of carnage, now it twisted only briefly, leaving him shuddering, his body unable to sustain the monstrous rage that had once made him unstoppable. The Morrigan was there too, her crow perched upon a withered branch at the edge of the field. She watched with patient eyes, her promise finally nearing its fulfillment. Each wound that struck him, each moment of weakness, was her triumph. But still, Cú Chulainn fought. The men of Connaught, though many, trembled as they closed in. For even weakened, the hound was more terrible than any man alive. His war cries split the sky, his eyes burned with the fire of gods. He fought not for himself, not for glory, but for Ulster, for Emer, for the vows he had sworn. His spear flashed, his sword rang, his shield splintered and reformed beneath the hammer of the foe. Yet no man can fight forever. At last, a spear struck deep, piercing his side. He staggered, falling to one knee. The armies roared, sensing the end, but still he did not yield. Blood poured from him, hot and crimson, staining the earth at his feet. His vision blurred, but he forced himself upright, his hand clutching his spear with white-knuckled fury. "I will not fall as other men fall," he growled through gritted teeth. Stumbling, he made his way toward a standing stone on the battlefield, its surface rough and ancient, a relic of older gods. With the last of his strength, he bound himself to it with his own belt, fastening his body upright. He would not lie in the dirt, he would not kneel before his enemies. Even in death, he would stand. And so, the Hound of Ulster, pierced by spears and bleeding from 100 wounds, tied himself to the stone. His head lifted, his eyes blazed, and he faced his enemies with defiance. The men of Connaught hesitated. None dared approach. For though he did not move, though his body was broken, he seemed still alive, still watching, still waiting to strike. The hours dragged on. Warriors circled at a distance, whispering in fear. Was he man? Was he God? Was he already dead, or did his spirit cling to the flesh, refusing to release its fury? The sun sank, the sky turned crimson, and still he stood. Only when at last the Morrigan's crow landed upon his shoulder did they know he was gone. Even then, they approached with caution, striking him only from afar, hurling stones and spears until his body slumped. But by then, the legend was sealed. He had not fallen as other men fall. He had died standing, unbroken, a hero until his final breath. Act 6. The land was eerily still, as though Ireland itself were holding its breath. The rivers crept quietly through their beds, the wind shifted softly through the trees, and the birds gave no song. It was as if the world already knew what was coming, the end of its greatest champion. Cú Chulainn, bruised and battered, carried the weight of his many battles like stones bound to his body. Yet his spirit, though scarred, still burned. That fire would not dim until the very last moment, until the fates themselves came to collect what was owed. But already shadows had gathered. His enemies, long nursing wounds of pride and blood, now stood ready to exact vengeance. Men who had lost sons, fathers, and brothers to the blade of the hound now rose together like a tide. Their whispers passed through the hills, a grim chorus: the hero must fall. They could not face him one by one, for they knew none could best him alone. But together, with trickery in numbers, perhaps fate would tip in their favor. And fate, it seemed, was listening. For the gods, who had once favored him, began to turn their gaze elsewhere. The Morrigan, goddess of war and fate, who had long shadowed Cú Chulainn, watched with a knowing smile. She had tested him, tempted him, warned him. And now, her prophecies moved toward their inevitable conclusion. Death was upon him, and though he knew it, the Hound of Ulster strode forward to meet it as if it were just another enemy on the field. The omens had been clear. A raven perched on his shoulder, black feathers brushing against his cheek, whispering of endings. His war horses, the mighty Lea Macha and Dub Sangland, screamed and wept as they were yoked to his chariot, their cries shaking the earth. Never before had they protested battle, but now they resisted, thrashing against the reins as if they too sensed the sorrow that would come. And still, Cú Chulainn soothed them, his hand firm and gentle upon their necks, whispering words of loyalty, of duty, of the glory they would chase together one last time. The ground trembled beneath the wheels of his chariot as he rode to the battlefield. His hair, wild as fire, whipped behind him, and his spear glinted with the promise of carnage. The armies that awaited him were vast, countless men eager to see the hero struck down. Yet when he appeared, a hush fell. For even in his waning strength, he looked like no mortal man. His eyes burned with that otherworldly rage, the Ryastrad, the battle frenzy that transformed him into a vision of terror. His muscles twisted, his face contorted, his body seemed to expand with supernatural fury. Even the bravest among his enemies felt their knees weaken. Still they came. Arrows darkened the sky, spears flew like a storm of iron, and warriors charged from every side. And Cú Chulainn answered with fury. His spear tore through flesh, his sword carved down men by the dozen, his war cry shattered courage. Alone, he carved a river of death through the battlefield, each step leaving another foe broken at his feet. The blood of his enemies stained his arms, his chest, his face, until he looked less like a man and more like a god of war incarnate. But even gods can bleed. A cursed spear found its mark, piercing his side. Another struck his leg, shattering bone. Still he fought, dragging himself forward, his weapon slick with blood, his teeth bared like a beast. More spears followed, one after another, until his body was pierced through like a stag brought low by hunters. And yet, he did not fall. His enemies watched in awe and fear as he remained standing, defiant even as life poured from him. With the last of his strength, Cú Chulainn dragged himself toward a standing stone that rose from the earth. He leaned against it, forcing his body upright, tying his own entrails to the rock to hold himself steady. His chest heaved with ragged breaths, but his eyes still glared with that same unbreakable fire. He would not give his enemies the satisfaction of seeing him fall. Even in death, he would stand. Even in his final hour, he would not yield. The battle slowed. A hush swept the field. His enemies circled him warily, too afraid to strike again, too fearful that perhaps he still lived. Hours passed. The sun dipped low, the sky awash with crimson. And still he stood, bound to the stone, his head bowed but his body unbroken. The men whispered among themselves, trembling with the thought that the Hound of Ulster yet drew breath. It was only when a raven descended upon his shoulder, pecking at the stillness of his body, that they knew the truth. The Morrigan's bird, the omen of death, confirmed that the great hero's spirit had fled. Only then did they dare to approach. Only then did they claim their revenge upon a man who had been more than human. Cú Chulainn, the mightiest warrior of Ireland, had met his end not in submission, not upon his knees, but standing tall, a figure of defiance carved into eternity. His death was not a defeat, it was a legend. A final act of defiance against the world itself, a curse that would linger in the hearts of men for generations. The land mourned him. His horses wept tears of blood. The rivers seemed to slow their flow. The sky dimmed, cloaked in shadow. Even his enemies, gazing upon the figure of the hero bound to the stone, felt no triumph, only dread. For they knew that no matter how many had come against him, no matter how many spears had pierced him, none could truly claim victory over the Hound of Ulster. His death belonged to fate alone. And so ended the life of Cú Chulainn, the boy who had risen too fast, the man who bore the weight of a nation, the hero cursed by glory. His fall was not merely the end of a warrior, but the passing of an age. For after him, no man would ever embody the same fury, the same sacrifice, the same tragic brilliance. The day of reckoning came cloaked in storm clouds, as though the heavens themselves wished to mourn before the final note was struck. By now, Cú Chulainn was a hollow echo of the warrior he had once been. His frame was still strong, his spear arms still deadly, but inside him burned the knowledge that all paths had narrowed to one. Fate had wound its threads tight around his throat, and he could feel its pull with every beat of his heart. Yet even so, he rose when the call came, because it was all he had ever known. A hero cannot flee his destiny, even when that destiny is to die. The armies gathered against Ulster were vast, greater than any he had faced before, and they bore the weight of vengeance. Mothers who had lost sons, kings who had lost pride, warriors who had known only humiliation, each one carried within him a hatred sharpened to a blade's edge. And at their head stood Legade, grim and relentless, carrying the 3 spears that had been forged by doom itself. They were weapons unlike any others, born of magic and prophecy, designed for no purpose but to slay Cú Chulainn. Each would find its mark, and each would claim a life close to him before finally tearing through his own. As he stepped onto the battlefield, he carried not only his own sorrow, but the weight of his people's survival. The Ulstermen had been weakened, many still stricken by the curse that had once left them helpless. He knew that he alone could stand in the breach, if only for a little longer. His chariot rattled across the bloody plain, the wheels hissing with fire, and the cries of his horses rose like mournful laments. Warriors drew back at the sight of him, for even in the shadow of his fall, he radiated terror. He fought as though each stroke of his blade were a farewell, a defiance against the end creeping toward him. But then the prophecy's cruel teeth sank deep. The first spear of Legade flew, whistling through the storm, and it struck not Cú Chulainn, but his beloved horse, Liamacha. The noble beast shrieked, blood spraying across the battlefield, and collapsed in death. Cú Chulainn's heart wrenched, for the horse had carried him through countless battles, its spirit as fierce as his own. Rage flared, and he fought harder, his strike splitting armor and bone. Yet the second spear came, guided by destiny's merciless hand, and it pierced Loig, his faithful charioteer, the companion who had never left his side, who had guided him through every war. Loig's cry was brief, and then he too was gone, leaving the hero in a silence louder than any roar of battle. The third spear, the final weapon, was loosed with deadly precision, and this one found its true mark. It tore through Cú Chulainn's body, ripping strength from him like water spilling from a shattered vessel. Blood streamed down his armor, hot and thick, and his knees buckled beneath him. Yet even then, he did not fall. With a grimace of iron will, he staggered to a great standing stone that rose from the battlefield, an ancient monolith weathered by centuries of wind and rain. Planting his foot, he bound himself upright to it with the entrails spilling from his wound, tying his own broken body to the stone so that he might never be seen to die lying down. It was his last act of defiance, a gesture that declared to friend and foe alike, "The Hound of Ulster stands, even in death." And so he remained, eyes blazing with fury and fire, his lips curled in a ghost of a smile. No enemy dared approach him, for they feared that somehow, even struck through the heart, he still held power enough to kill. Hours passed, the sun sinking low and the shadows growing long, and there he stood, motionless, bound in blood, the wind tugging at his hair like a morning song. His enemies whispered, circling, unsure. Was he alive? Was he dead? None dared step closer. At last, a raven fluttered down and perched upon his shoulder, black wings spreading against the crimson light. It was Morrigan, the Phantom Queen, who had haunted his path all his life, waiting for this very moment. At her touch, the truth was undeniable: the hero had fallen. And so the spell of dread broke, and his enemies rushed forward. They cut him down where he hung, hacking at his flesh until the body of Cú Chulainn was no more. But even in his ruin, they whispered with awe, for no man had ever died as he had, standing, defiant, with fire in his eyes until the very end. Thus passed the Hound of Ulster, the champion who had lived as both man and myth, cursed with greatness and condemned by fate. His death was not simply an end, but a haunting echo that rippled through the ages, a reminder that even the strongest cannot escape destiny's snare. His enemies rejoiced, yet they carried fear in their hearts, for they knew they had not slain a man, but a legend, and legends do not die as men do. They linger, immortal, in memory and in shadow. And so, beneath the grey skies of Ireland, the story of Cú Chulainn reached its close, painted in blood, grief, and glory. He was a hero cursed to burn too brightly, to fight too fiercely, to love and lose too deeply. His life was a flame that could not last, but its light seared the world forever. And even now, when the winds howl across the hills of Ulster and the ravens circle the lonely stones, some say his spirit still lingers, standing guard, unbowed, unbroken, and waiting for the next dawn. Cú Chulainn's tale lingers like smoke after a fire, dark, bitter, and impossible to forget. In his youth, he burned bright, so bright that no foe could match him, and no hero could surpass his fame. Yet for all his strength, for all his courage, his life was shackled to a curse he never chose. That curse was woven into him before he was old enough to understand it, when fate marked him as a hero destined for tragedy. In the story of his fall, there is a lesson that strikes deeper than any sword. No matter how mighty, no matter how beloved, even the greatest among us cannot outrun the shadow of destiny. His life was a balance of glory and sorrow. Each victory pulled him higher into legend, but with each step, he was walking closer to his inevitable end. That is the cruel paradox of Cú Chulainn. His greatest gift was also the weight that destroyed him. The tale haunts us because it feels familiar, even though it comes from a world of gods and warriors. It is the story of burning too fiercely, of sacrificing peace for greatness, of carrying burdens no one else could bear. And perhaps most haunting of all, it is the story of being left behind, of watching your world grow old, while you remain caught in the chains of your own promise. His people adored him, but they could never free him. His friends cherished him, but they could never ease the curse. In the end, he was alone, pinned to the earth like a fallen star. Some say stories like this endure because they whisper truths about us all. We may not battle armies with a single spear, nor fight gods in disguise, but we know what it is to feel trapped by choices we cannot change. We know what it is to give everything for those we love, only to discover that sacrifice does not always mean salvation. In Cú Chulainn's fall, we see both the beauty and the cruelty of being human, the will to stand when everything demands you fall, and the inevitability of the moment when even the strongest knees must bend. Tonight, as we step away from his story, perhaps we carry with us the echo of his defiance. Perhaps we remember that though curses may bind, and fate may demand its due, there is still power in how we face the end. Cú Chulainn did not crawl from his battlefield. He did not flee into the shadows. He tied himself to a stone so that he would remain standing, even in death. And in that act, there is a strange kind of victory, not over fate, but over fear. This, more than anything, is why his story still matters. It reminds us that no matter how dark the night, there is dignity in facing it head-on. It tells us that even when destiny strikes its final blow, the way we meet it is our own. Cú Chulainn could not escape his curse, but he transformed it into a legend that would outlast his enemies, his people, and even the land he fought to protect. And so his shadow stretches across the centuries, as haunting and unshakable as the cry of the banshee on a lonely Irish hill. His death is not the silence of an extinguished flame, it is the eternal glow of an ember that refuses to fade. That ember burns in the stories told around firesides, in the whispered prayers of poets, and perhaps even here tonight, as we sit together in the dim quiet, remembering him. Thank you for walking this path with me, into the haunted heart of Ireland's greatest warrior. His fall may leave us heavy, but his defiance leaves us stronger. This was the legend of Cú Chulainn, the boy who became a warrior, the warrior who became a curse, and the cursed who became eternal. Until our next story, may your nights be calm, your dreams untroubled, and your spirit unbound by fate. Good night.